The primordial gods had not spoken to the mortal realm in over 10,000 years. They existed beyond the fabric of reality itself, watching the universe unfold like observers studying drops of water under glass. They had created stars, breathed life into barren worlds, and guided the first sparks of consciousness across the cosmos. But eventually, they had grown tired. Tired of intervening, tired of guiding, tired of watching species pray for help they would never receive. So they content to observe without touching, to watch without caring. The universe continued without them. Civilizations rose and fell. Wars were fought and peace treaties signed. Species discovered fire, built cities, reached for the stars, and joined the great tapestry of galactic society. The primordial gods watched it all with the detached interest of those who had seen everything before. Among the younger species was humanity. They had only recently cracked the secret of faster-than-light travel, stumbling into the galactic community like children entering a room full of adults. The established civilizations looked at humans and saw nothing impressive. Humans were weak compared to the mighty, whose bodies were covered in natural armor thick enough to stop plasma bolts. Humans had no telepathic abilities like the Ra, who could communicate across entire star systems through their linked minds. Humans didn't live for centuries like the wise, who remembered the rise and fall of empires firsthand. What humans did have was a bloody, brutal history, wars that had consumed entire continents, slavery, genocide, and exploitation that had marked every chapter of their development. The galactic community reviewed Earth's historical databases and came to a quick conclusion. Humanity was dangerous, selfish, and destined to burn itself out. Better to keep them at arm's length and wait for the inevitable collapse. The primordial gods barely noticed humanity's arrival. They had seen 1,000 aggressive species before. Most destroyed themselves within a few centuries of reaching space. The rest usually learned to cooperate out of necessity, forming alliances based on mutual benefit and calculated risk. There was nothing new here, nothing worth the attention of beings who had witnessed the birth of the universe itself. Then came the cascade. Deep in the cluster, an ancient star system began its death throes. It should have been a localized event, spectacular but contained. Instead, something went catastrophically wrong. The star's collapse triggered a chain reaction in the quantum foam of space itself, a spreading wave of destruction that would consume everything in its path. The cascade would destroy 17 inhabited worlds and kill billions of sentient beings. The galactic powers convened an emergency council. Representatives from every major civilization gathered in the Great Assembly Hall on neutral ground, and the mood was grim. The Ra had run the calculations through their telepathic network. There wasn't enough time to evacuate everyone. The mathematics were brutal and unforgiving. The military commander stood first, his armored bulk casting shadows across the chamber. "We must prioritize our own colonies," he said, his voice like grinding stone. "The worlds in the cluster contain our best genetic stock and our most important military installations. We will commit our fleet to evacuation, but we will save our own people first." The Ra speaker rose next, her form shimmering with the telepathic energy of 1,000 linked minds. "We have calculated the cultural value of each civilization in the affected zone," she said, her words echoing with harmonic overtones. "We should save those species whose loss would most damage the galactic community. Art, science, philosophy, these are what matter. We will save those who contribute most." The representative, ancient even by his people's standards, spoke with quiet authority. "A lottery system is most fair. We cannot save everyone, so we should give everyone an equal chance. Random selection removes bias and prevents conflict." One by one, the civilizations presented their plans. Each one prioritized their own survival or offered complex formulas for determining who deserved rescue. The humans sat in their delegation seats and said nothing. Ambassador Wei listened to every proposal with her hands folded on the table before her. Her face showed nothing. Finally, the council chairman turned to the human delegation. And what does Earth propose? His tone suggested he expected nothing useful. Wei stood slowly. She was a small woman, unremarkable by human standards, and she looked even smaller next to the towering alien representatives. Earth will commit our entire civilian fleet to the evacuation effort, she said clearly. Every transport ship, every cargo hauler, every passenger vessel. We will evacuate anyone who needs rescue, regardless of species. First come, first served. No prioritization. The chamber fell silent. Then the commander leaned forward. And if human colonies are caught in the cascade, what then? Wei met his eyes without flinching. Then we'll do what we can for them too, but we won't abandon others to save ourselves. The representative shook his head slowly. That is inefficient. You will save fewer lives overall with such a chaotic approach. Maybe, Wei said, but at least we'll be able to look at ourselves in the mirror afterward. The Ra speaker's harmonics took on a puzzled tone. We do not understand. This strategy does not benefit humanity. There is no advantage to this approach. Why would you volunteer your resources for those who have shown you nothing but contempt? Wei smiled sadly. Because they need help, that's reason enough. The council dismissed the human proposal as naive grandstanding. They drew up their evacuation plans, divided territories, and calculated acceptable losses. The humans were given a small sector to handle, far from any Earth colonies. The other civilizations assumed humans would work their assigned area and then retreat when things got dangerous. But Earth's fleets were already moving. Thousands of civilian ships, piloted by volunteers, began pouring into the cluster. Cargo ships that normally hauled grain and manufactured goods. Passenger liners designed for tourists and business travelers. Even personal yachts and family transports. If it could fly and had room for passengers, it was heading toward the disaster zone. The galactic community watched on their monitors and waited for humanity to come to its senses. Surely, they would pull back once the real danger became apparent. Surely, they would prioritize their own people. Surely, they would prove to be just like everyone else. In the spaces between dimensions, where reality bent and twisted into impossible shapes, the primordial gods began to pay attention. The youngest of their kind was the first to notice the human fleet's approach. The young ones are moving into danger, observed. The fragile species with short lives. Eldest of the gods had been sleeping for 3,000 years. She opened eyes that had witnessed the first stars ignite. All mortal species flee danger. It is their nature. These ones are flying toward it, said. For the first time focused her full attention on the mortal realm. She watched the human ships accelerate into the cascade zone. She observed the other species evacuating their own people first, exactly as expected. And she saw humanity doing something different. Curious murmured. The other primordial gods began to wake from their long rest, drawn by interest. They gathered in the spaces beyond space and watched the mortal realm with ancient eyes. They had seen bravery before, countless times. They had seen sacrifice in war, seen parents die for children, seen soldiers throw themselves on grenades. But this felt different somehow. The human ships reached the first refugee camps. Millions of people from dozens of species were packed into temporary shelters on doomed worlds, waiting for rescue that might never come. They had saved their military personnel. The Ra had evacuated their telepathic elders. They had run their lottery and taken the winners. The humans took everyone else. A human cargo ship named the Steadfast Hope was loading refugees when a military transport broke down nearby. The transport was full of civilians, people who hadn't made the military's priority list. The Steadfast Hope stopped its own evacuation run and diverted to help repair the transport. The captain radioed back to Fleet Command to explain the delay. "We've got people who need help," the captain said simply. The Fleet Command asked if they were human people. The captain's response was recorded and transmitted back to Earth. "They're people. That's all that matters." The primordial gods leaned closer, their attention sharpening. The steadfast hope in its crew would make it out with minutes to spare, but they lost hours they could have used to save more human refugees. They chose to help aliens instead, aliens whose people had mocked humanity in the galactic forums. They gain nothing from this, said, confusion coloring the young god's voice. No, agreed, they gain nothing. The gods continued to watch. The evacuation became a desperate race against cosmic annihilation. The cascade spread through the cluster like fire through dry grass, consuming star systems one by one. The shockwave moved slower than light but faster than most ships could sustain over long distances. Every hour counted. Every minute mattered. Human ships worked without rest. Crews stayed awake for days, pumped full of stimulants and sheer determination. They loaded refugees of species they had never met before, people who spoke languages they didn't understand. When communication failed, humans used hand gestures and pantomime. When that failed, they simply pointed toward the ships and kept loading people. The raw telepaths on the refugee worlds found themselves overwhelmed by the psychic screams of panic. Billions of terrified minds crying out at once created a telepathic storm that paralyzed the raw rescue coordinators. They collapsed under the weight of so much fear and anguish. The evacuation ground to a halt on 3 worlds. Human volunteers stepped in. They couldn't sense the telepathic noise, so it didn't affect them. They took over coordination on the ground, using old-fashioned radios and visual signals. They organized the crowds, directed traffic, and kept the evacuation moving. When a raw coordinator recovered enough to ask why the humans were helping, one volunteer just shrugged. "You needed help, we were here." Captain Sarah commanded the colony ship Tomorrow's Promise. Her vessel was designed to carry 5,000 passengers in reasonable comfort. She had loaded 12,000 refugees onto her ship. They packed the cargo bays, filled the corridors, and crowded into every available space. Ra and a dozen other species. Some of them had openly mocked humanity in the past. None of that mattered now. The Tomorrow's Promise was 3 hours from the safe zone when the life support systems began to fail. The ship simply wasn't designed for this many people. The air scrubbers couldn't keep up. Carbon dioxide levels were rising. The ship's computer calculated that they would suffocate before reaching safety. The elder who had been rescued from a failing station came to the bridge. He was one of the members of his species, a being who had lived for 4 centuries and advised 3 governments. He did the mathematics quickly and presented Captain with the solution. "You must evacuate Cargo Bay 3, the elder said. "Jettison those refugees into escape pods. They will have enough air to survive until another ship can retrieve them. This will reduce the load enough for the rest of us to survive." Captain looked at the elder for a long moment. "How many people are in Cargo Bay 3? 3,014. By my people's metrics, they are the least valuable individuals aboard. Many are elderly, some are criminals, others are simply workers with limited skills. Sacrificing them saves 9,000 more useful lives." Sarah looked at her first officer, then at her engineering chief. Both of them looked back at her with steady eyes. They had served together for 6 years. They knew each other's minds. "Redirect life support from the bridge and crew quarters to the cargo bays," Sarah ordered. "All of it. We'll run the ship on emergency power and breathe what's left." Her crew moved immediately to comply. The engineering chief started rerouting systems. The first officer began organizing the crew into shifts. The elder stepped forward. "Captain, this is illogical. You're condemning yourselves to save those who matter less." Sarah turned to face him. "On my ship, everyone matters the same. Those people in Cargo Bay 3 didn't sign up for this danger. My crew did. We volunteered. We knew the risks. It's our job to get everyone to safety, and that includes ourselves if we can, but if we can't, then at least we tried." The crew of the Tomorrow's Promise flew their ship in shifts after that. Officers rotated through the cargo bay to sleep in corners among the refugees, breathing the same thinning air. They shared their food rations. They gave up their water. When the air got thin enough that people started passing out, the humans made sure the oxygen masks went to the refugees first. 3 human crew members died from oxygen deprivation. Chief Engineer Tors, who kept the engines running until his heart finally gave out. Navigator, who plotted their course until she collapsed at her station. Medical Officer David, who used the last of the medical oxygen on a child instead of himself. The Tomorrow's Promise made it to the safe zone with 11 minutes to spare. All 12,000 refugees survived. The human crew was hailed as heroes by every species in the galaxy, but Captain's response at the press conference was simple. "We just did our jobs. Anyone would have done the same." But everyone knew that wasn't true. No one else had done the same. No one else would have. The human medical ship Mercy's Hand had been assigned to evacuate a civilian hospital. But on their way out of the danger zone, they received a distress call from a military hospital. The military hospital hadn't been prioritized because it only contained wounded soldiers who were no longer combat effective. The High Command had written them off as acceptable losses. The Mercy's Hand diverted from their escape route. They loaded 1,500 soldiers, many of them badly wounded, many of them the same soldiers who had called humans weak and pathetic. The detour cost them their safe window. The cascade caught them just as they cleared the atmosphere. The ship's shields held long enough to get the soldiers to safety, but the human medical staff inside suffered radiation exposure that would take years to heal. Some of them would never fully recover. When asked why they had risked so much for enemy soldiers, the ship's captain said simply, "They weren't enemies. They were patients who needed help." The civilian transport Second Chances was evacuating a mixed group of refugees when they encountered a Ra nursery ship. The Ra had tried to evacuate their young first, but the nursery ship had suffered engine damage. It was adrift, unable to outrun the cascade, carrying 8,000 Ra children too young to survive without specialized care. The Second Chances was a small ship. They didn't have room for 8,000 children. They didn't have the specialized equipment Ra Young needed, but they had a working engine and a clear escape route. The crew of the Second Chances made their choice in seconds. They gave up their escape vector to shield the nursery ship from radiation. They used their own ship as a barrier, absorbing the worst of the cascade's leading edge while the Ra ship limped toward safety. The Second Chances survived, but barely. The crew retreated to the ship's reinforced core, packed together in a space meant for emergency use only. They suffered radiation burns, cellular damage, and long-term health effects that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. But 8,000 Ra children lived. Stories like these across the cluster. Human ships that stopped to help stranded vessels. Human crews that gave up their own safety margins to take on more refugees. Human volunteers who worked until they collapsed, were revived, and went back to work. The pattern was consistent, undeniable, and completely baffling to the other species. This wasn't strategy. This wasn't even logical. Humans were sacrificing their own safety, their own lives, for species that had shown them nothing but contempt. They weren't gaining political capital. They weren't improving their reputation. Most of the time, they weren't even expecting thanks. The galactic civilizations watched their monitors in confusion and growing shame. The military command realized they had saved fewer people than humanity despite having a larger fleet. The Ra telepathic network buzzed with uncomfortable questions about their value-based selection system. The wise councils met in emergency sessions to discuss what they had witnessed. In the spaces beyond reality, the primordial gods watched with fascination that bordered on wonder. They had been silent for 10,000 years, but now they stirred. They leaned closer to the mortal realm, their attention focused like sunlight through a magnifying glass. Spoke first, voice full of confusion. "They barely know these species. Most of these aliens have been cruel to them. Why do the humans care? Was silent for a long moment. She had seen countless civilizations rise and fall. She had watched species cooperate when it benefited them, had seen alliances of convenience, had witnessed mercy extended to one's own kind. But this was different. This was something new. "I don't know," admitted. "Perhaps we should ask them." For the first time in 10, the primordial gods prepared to speak to mortals. They had thought they had seen everything, understood everything. But humanity had shown them something unexpected, something they didn't understand. And beings who had lived since the birth of time found themselves curious again. The last human ship limped out of the cluster 6 hours before the final collapse. The cascade consumed the remaining worlds, leaving nothing but twisted space-time and the ghosts of civilizations. The destruction was complete, absolute, and final. The galactic community gathered the statistics. Humanity had lost 847 ships. 23,000 human crew members were dead. The economic cost would set Earth back decades. Human colonies on the edge of the disaster zone had been evacuated last, after all the alien refugees had been saved. Thousands of humans had died waiting for rescue that came too late. But humanity had evacuated over 4 million refugees, 4 million people from 24 different species. The survival rate for the cascade would have been less than 20% without human intervention. With it, 76% of the cluster's population survived. The military commander stood before the Galactic Assembly. His armor was scorched from the radiation, his voice rough from breathing bad air in overloaded ships. He performed his species' gesture of profound respect, dropping to one knee and bowing his massive head. It was something no had ever done for a human before. "We were wrong," he said, his words echoing through the chamber. "We calculated that humanity would retreat once their own costs became too high. We thought they would prove to be like us, prioritizing their own survival above all else. We did not understand that for humans the calculation includes everyone, not just their own species. Everyone." The raw speaker rose, her harmonic voice subdued. "Our telepathic network analyzed human decision-making during the crisis. We searched for the hidden motive, the secret advantage they were seeking. We found none. They helped because others needed help. That was the entire reason. We do not understand how a species can function this way. It should not be possible." The representative, the same ancient being who had advised Captain to jettison the refugees, spoke last. "I have lived for 4 centuries. I have advised empires and witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. I believed I understood wisdom, but I watched humans choose to die rather than abandon people they had never met. I watched them suffer permanent injury to save children of species who had called them primitive. And I realized that perhaps wisdom is not about living long enough to see everything. Perhaps wisdom is about caring even when caring costs everything." Ambassador Wei sat in her delegation chair and listened. She looked tired. She had barely slept since the cascade began, coordinating Earth's response, making the impossible decisions about where to send ships when they couldn't be everywhere. She had signed the orders that sent thousands of people to their deaths. She carried those names with her, would carry them forever. When the assembly finally adjourned, returned to her quarters. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, ready to sleep for a week. But when she entered her room, she found she was not alone. The presence was vast, ancient, and overwhelming. It filled her quarters without taking up physical space, existed in dimensions she couldn't see but could somehow sense. His first instinct was to be afraid, but the presence radiated something that made fear impossible. It felt like standing at the edge of an infinite ocean, seeing the stars reflected in still water. "Do not be afraid," a voice said, though it wasn't really a voice. It was understanding, communication that bypassed language entirely. I am what your species might call a god." Sat down slowly on her bed. Her mind was racing, but years of diplomatic training kicked in. "I see. Is there something I can help you with? If a cosmic entity could express surprise, did so. You ask if you can help me, after what you have endured. Force of habit, admitted. We're kind of in helping mode right now. Manifested a form could perceive more easily, a shimmer of light that roughly resembled a human shape. My kind have been silent for 10,000 years. We created stars, breathed life into worlds, guided the first civilizations. But we grew tired of involvement. We to watch without interference. We have seen thousands of species rise and fall. We thought we had seen every variation of consciousness, every possible way sentient beings could interact. Waited, she was good at waiting. Then we watched humanity during the cascade, continued. We watched you make choices we did not understand. You sacrificed your own people to save aliens who have shown you nothing but contempt. You gave up advantages without gaining anything in return. Your behavior makes no strategic sense. It violates every principle of survival and evolution that has governed life since the universe began. I see, said carefully, and we want to understand why. We need to understand why. Was quiet for a moment, then she smiled tiredly. It's not complicated. Those people needed help. We could help, so we did. But you gained nothing. You lost so much. We gained the knowledge that we did the right thing. We lost people, yes, but we saved millions more. How could we not try? How could we look at people in danger and just calculate whether saving them benefited us? Form shifted, colors swirling. Other species do exactly that. They have always done that. Cooperation exists when it provides mutual benefit. Sacrifice happens for family, for tribe, for nation. But you extended that circle to include everyone, even strangers, even enemies. They're not enemies, said firmly. They're just people we haven't helped yet. The primordial god was silent for a long moment. Then, you have shown us something we have never seen before. Kindness without calculation, sacrifice without debt, mercy without condition. We created consciousness across the universe, but we never imagined it would develop this way. Felt other presences joining. More gods, ancient beings gathering to witness this conversation. She should have been terrified. Instead, she just felt very, very tired. So what happens now? She asked. We wish to offer you a gift, said. Knowledge from the dawn of time, enhanced longevity for your species, access to dimensions where the laws of physics bend to thought. We want to reward what you have shown us. Shook her head. That's generous, but I don't think that's what we need. What do you need? Can you help us be better at this? Can you help all species, including us, learn to choose kindness when it's hard? We're not perfect. We have our own history of cruelty and selfishness. We have to work at being kind every single day. It would be easier if everyone was working toward the same goal. The assembled gods were silent. Youngest of their kind finally spoke. You want us to help others become like you. You want to share this trait rather than keep it as an advantage. It's not an advantage if we're the only ones who have it, said. The galaxy works better when everyone cares about everyone else. That's not complicated math. Felt something she hadn't experienced in humility. These brief, fragile creatures had taught beings of cosmic power something fundamental about existence. Humanity didn't want rewards for their nature. They wanted to spread it, to teach it, to make the entire galaxy more like the best versions of themselves. We accept your request, said. We will emerge from our long silence. We will establish what your people might call a covenant. An agreement that the species who taught ancient gods about selfless kindness will help guide the galaxy toward a future where such kindness is universal. Nodded slowly. That sounds good, but I should warn you we're going to keep working at this whether you help or not. It's kind of what we do. The gods, but their presence lingered. Over the next days, they appeared to humans across the galaxy, to Captain as she recovered in a medical bay, to the crew of the Second Chances as they underwent radiation treatment, to the families of those who had died in the cascade, to volunteers who had worked until they collapsed. The message was the same to all of them. The primordial gods had awakened. They had seen what humanity had done. They acknowledged it, they honored it, and they wanted to help spread it. The other species heard about the gods' return and felt a mixture of emotions. Shame at their own choices during the cascade, wonder at being noticed by beings they had thought were myths, and slowly, a growing desire to live up to the standard humanity had set. They began restructuring their military to prioritize protection over conquest. The Ra used their telepathic network to spread empathy instead of just information. They started teaching that wisdom meant caring about others, not just calculating the best outcomes. The Galactic Assembly established the Covenant of Open Hearts with humanity at its center, not as rulers or masters but as teachers and examples. They contributed their strength. The Ra offered their telepathic unity. They provided their wisdom. But the core principle came from humanity. The measure of a civilization isn't in its power or knowledge, but in its willingness to help those who cannot help themselves. The primordial gods watched their experiment in consciousness bloom in unexpected directions. They realized they had been waiting all along for a species that would remind them why they had created life in the first place. Not for domination or survival or even prosperity, but for the profound beauty of beings choosing to care for one another. Ambassador Wei attended the first Covenant gathering representing Earth. When asked to speak, she kept it simple. We're not special. We're not perfect. We're just people who decided that everyone deserves help when they need it. Any species can make that choice. We hope everyone will. The commander stood. We will try. The Ra speaker's harmonics resonated with determination. We will learn. The representative bowed deeply. We will teach our young ones. One by one, every species in the galaxy pledged to embrace the principle humanity had demonstrated. Kindness without calculation, sacrifice without debt, helping because others needed help, not because it provided advantage. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks and failures. Old hatreds didn't disappear overnight. Selfish impulses didn't vanish just because everyone agreed they should. But the direction was clear. The galaxy was changing, becoming something better than it had been. The primordial gods remained present, no longer withdrawn and distant. But they didn't rule or command. They had learned humility from humans. Instead, they watched and occasionally helped, guiding when asked but never forcing. Spoke to one last time before the ambassador returned to Earth. We thought we understood consciousness. We thought we had seen everything. Thank you for showing us we were wrong. Smiled, thank you for noticing. A lot of people died to do what we did. It helps to know it mattered. It mattered more than you know. Humanity returned home to a changed galaxy. They were no longer the dismissed newcomers, the species everyone expected to fail. They were teachers, examples, the people who had shown everyone what was possible when you chose to care. But humans, being human, didn't let it go to their heads. There were still refugees who needed homes. There were still wounds that needed healing. There was still work to do, rebuilding the cluster's survivors, helping traumatized people recover, ensuring the dead were remembered. Captain Sarah returned to service after recovering from her injuries. She commanded a new ship, the Tomorrow's Hope, built with better life support systems and more cargo space. When asked if she would do it again, she answered without hesitation. In a heartbeat, that's what we're here for, to help people, all people. The crew of the Second Chances received the galaxy's highest honor for valor. They accepted it gracefully, then went back to work. There were still people who needed transport, still refugees waiting for rides home. The families of the 23,000 who died received compensation from every grateful species in the galaxy. They used the money to establish the Cascade Foundation, dedicated to disaster relief and emergency response. The Foundation's motto was simple: everyone matters. Earth's economy recovered faster than predicted, helped by grateful alien species who suddenly wanted to trade with humanity, to learn from them, to be near them. But humans remained careful not to exploit that gratitude. They negotiated fair deals, insisted on mutual benefit, and turned down offers that would have given them unfair advantages. "We didn't do it for rewards," Wei explained to the Galactic Trade Council. "We did it because it was right. If we start using it for advantage now, we betray everything those 23,000 died for." Years passed. The covenant of open hearts grew stronger. Species that had been rivals for centuries began cooperating. Wars ended not because someone won, but because both sides realized fighting was stupid when they could be helping each other instead. The galaxy became a kinder place, slowly but steadily. The primordial gods watched it all with satisfaction. They had thought their work was finished eons ago, that they had nothing left to learn or do. Humanity had shown them otherwise. The universe was still full of surprises. Life was still worth paying attention to. And sometimes, the youngest and weakest species had the most important lessons to teach. Gathered the gods one last time to discuss what they had witnessed. "We shaped stars and created worlds," she said. "We thought that was our greatest achievement. But watching this species choose kindness over survival, watching them spread that choice to others, watching the galaxy transform because of it, I think perhaps our greatest achievement was stepping back and letting them surprise us." Who had first noticed humanity's unusual behavior spoke thoughtfully. "They're still fragile, they still die easily, they still struggle with their own darker impulses, but they keep trying to be better. They keep choosing to help, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." "Yes," agreed. "That's what makes it meaningful. They could choose the easy path. They could prioritize themselves, but they don't. That choice made over and over despite the cost, that's what we had never seen before." The gods returned to their observations, but they remained present, no longer withdrawn. They had learned that watching was good, but occasionally participating was better. They had learned humility. They had learned that even cosmic entities could learn from mortals. And they had learned that the measure of consciousness wasn't power or knowledge or longevity. It was the choice to care, the decision to help, the refusal to abandon others even when abandonment was easier. Humanity had taught them that, and the galaxy would never be the same.